It says I'm live. It says I'm live. I bet that means you're live too. And the reason that we're here is because we're alive. I'm Judith K. Friedman. I'm very, very honored to be here. I am the steward of the Myth Singer Legacy Project, the founding director of Songwriting Works Educational Foundation, and a lifelong singer and songwriter, really since my teens, and I just turned 62. So I'm here with Audrey DeMola. I'm coming in from the Northwest, located here at Mossy Rock, the home of Daniel Deardorff and myself, now stewarding his work, continuing on the love that we shared, not only for each other, but for the oral tradition, for the power of myth and the power of song and story. And so today we are celebrating this wonderful new edition of Daniel Deardorff's The Other Within, The Genius of Deformity in Myth, Culture, and Psyche. And let me just double check a few things, little housekeeping here. Are you hearing good quality vocals? Wonderful. And I've got a thumbs up from Audrey on the side. We see that there's two people so far joining us on the stream. Welcome, welcome. And I would love it if you would introduce yourself if you feel like it, or tell us at least where you're coming in from. It would be really wonderful to find out. We just had a first live stream a few minutes ago at the top of the noon hour Pacific time. We had people from as far away as Slovenia and Spain joining us, as well as across the United States. And we don't even know where everyone was from, because not everybody said so, but we hope that you will identify your location in the chat and say anything that you like. If you're new to Daniel's work, if you're familiar with it, if you have an earlier copy of the book, one of the things that's brand new in this edition, and I'm very honored to have been the person to help expand this edition, is that we have new commentaries by mythologist Martin Shaw and the wonderful writer and thinker and really activist for healing Robert Simmons, author of Stones of the New Consciousness and the Book of Stones. And he's the one who brought us to Inner Traditions as a wonderful publisher. And you should check out their launching many books today at innertraditions.com. And we are very, very honored and pleased that this is one of them. So they are keeping Daniel Deardorff's work in print. And welcome to the person who just arrived. And just a moment, I'm going to lift a toast to this new book and to our getting to be connected here. I always drink water for my toasts, but you know, if you've got a caffeinated beverage or whatever it is, an air toast, here's to your health, to the longevity of Daniel Deardorff's work and legacy, to our all joining together in community in magical and mystical and wonderful ways, as we will have more and more opportunity to do with the release of this new edition of The Other Within. So, blessings. Slonge, as they say. You can't put your glass down until you've drunk from it. I've learned that from Martin Shaw and Daniel. Otherwise, you're negating what you just said. You don't want to do that. So I see that Yelena is here from Slovenia again. How wonderful. Thank you for coming back. Salud. And there's more people who are contacting me on text messages and in the chat. And we have all of our devices going. So I'm going to just say a few things about myself and the Myth Singer Legacy Project. As and my combs are falling out of my hair, so I'll just keep on. Also, you know, that's the thing about Zoom. We all know this. We started to use Zoom as a mirror. It's very strange. Anyway, Zoom, YouTube Live, all of these different things, these platforms, we've got them all going here at once. So, as I said, my name is Judith Kate Friedman, and I am very amazed still and so moved and transformed by the fact that Daniel Deardorff and I met at the Great Mother Conference, Robert Bly's conference on the Great Mother and the New Father in 2003 on Orcas Island, and fell in love immediately as artistic friends. Nothing romantic about it for about 2.5 years. And then we found out we were both single and everything changed. And I got courted with all these beautiful songs. But first, I had already met this man as an artist, a thinker, a generous soul, a great teacher, an amazing myth teller, and a fabulous songwriter and composer. And he also did visual art to accompany many of the images that are in his work. And April, thank you for coming from NYC. Awesome. So great to have you in the house. So, Daniel and I met not far from here because I am beaming in from Port Townsend, Washington, originally the village of Katai, which is Sklallam and Chimacum lands and the gathering place of Coast Salish peoples. And Audrey DeMola is here with me from NYC. Is that Lenape land where you are? Or other? Yes. And if you would again just tell us where in the world you might be beaming in from. We're going to share some excerpts from the book and this very important day, this auspicious day in U.S. history and in the world regarding the fact that we're having what they call the midterm elections, the elections in between the presidential elections. And so much is on the ballot, including democracy itself this time around. So if you haven't voted and you can vote, please do. And what I'm drawing from today, because it's so important for us to keep our spirits up, whatever your own personal opinion is, we're not going to get into bipartisanship, politics, all of that. We're getting into the soul level of transformation, myth, culture, and psyche. And what does it mean to listen to the wisdom of people over generations and then over centuries of the written word? But before that, those who are also carrying the oral traditions from way, way back, from the 10,000-year-old stories, as they're sometimes talked about, the myths, the places that we can learn, we can go to as a storehouse of wisdom, because they are said to have come from the earth, which is the storehouse of life itself. And so from this place, Daniel started out as a singer and songwriter. He was a signed artist in the California rock scene in the 1970s, toured with Seals and Crofts for a number of years, almost a decade, and all over the United States and Canada. He then, as a solo artist, performed in a bunch of different ways and places and was signed, but then ultimately exiled from the music industry. And why? Because of his physical being, not his sound. They would have loved it if he could just not be visible, because there was so much prejudice against a person who used a wheelchair to get around. And yet when he was on tour with Seals and Crofts, and I want to go on record saying this, and if there's anyone out there listening or sharing this with people from that community, please send more story our way from people who are actually there. But I know they constructed a beautiful platform for Danny to lay out and play his music, because if he played mandolin laying down, and the reason that his body was different and twisted is that he was a polio survivor. He had paralytic polio from the age of 17 months. And he had two kinds of polio, actually, and survived them. He was in an iron lung and went through a lot of different travails in his youngest life. And then he also had experimental surgeries, some that tragically ended up giving him a more twisted physique than polio itself ever would. And by the time he was 15, he actually broke loose of the last hospital stay and soon got his freedom and moved with his brothers and was in Bellingham, Washington, and formed a band called Magic, and then started getting his work out there as a songwriter and drawing his audiences and working his magic. And he went down to LA and met with Seals and Crofts management and was signed and worked with them for a number of years. And to their credit, this is the part that I'll just share before getting into a reading from the book. There were many promoters around the country who took one look at Daniel in his wheelchair and said, he can't go on stage. This was before the Americans with Disabilities Act. These are these promoters of this great rock band at the peak of their time, Seals and Crofts, the duo that made Summer Breeze, Diamond Girl, and other hits that you probably remember if you were around or if you listen to oldies now. And they, the band, to their credit, told the promoters, if you don't want Daniel on stage, then we're not going to play. And so they advocated, and they had a whole setup so that he would go out on stage with his band and he'd be all in place, and then the lights would come up and he would do his spot, and he would often be getting standing ovations, and he was having this wonderful on-ramp, as many artists do. And then the doors closed in the music industry. And earlier today, I found this quote online from Joni Mitchell. Happy birthday, Joni. I believe it was yesterday that it was her birthday. Thank you so much for continuing to make music and share your life and your art. She said, quote, I heard someone from the music business saying they are no longer looking for talent. They want people with a certain look and a willingness to cooperate. I thought that's interesting because I believe a total unwillingness to cooperate is what is necessary to be an artist, not for perverse reasons, but to protect our vision. The considerations of a corporation, especially now, have nothing to do with art or music. That's why I spend my time now painting. Thank you, Joni, for saying that. And so back in the day, in the late 1970s, Daniel was not able to work anymore in LA. Due to the fact that he used a wheelchair and his body takes a turn, a twist. He writes a lot in the book about crookedness. It's not only his own, but the idea of the genius of deformity in myth, culture, and psyche is that the deformity also comes from this idea about the deforming of images. The French philosopher Gaston Bachelard taught that in order to unleash the imagination, we need to look at form and break form. And it's in the breaking of form, it's in the looking at things from many different angles that we end up understanding wholeness, but also having our whole imagination and also our soul, as well as our mind, our body, all the parts be in this multivalent conversation. Thank you, Will Johnson, saying hello from the UK. Welcome, welcome. And so before I start riffing for another bunch of minutes, what I'm going to do instead is read from the book, because the passage that I've chosen for, or that chose me actually, because you can open this book like a divination tool. It has 220 pages. It's all Daniel Deardorff's original writing and synthesis, but it also includes gleanings and teachings from almost 100. I believe there's 99 different authors and poets and wisdom teachers quoted in here, from anthropology, from psychology, from the arts, all different forms of thinking, all different eras of thought, different lineages and generations of mythologists, and so on. And Daniel called himself an associative mythologist. So he was leaping, to use Robert Bly's term, his great friend and teacher, the poet Robert Bly, also now of blessed memory. Robert would talk about the leaping consciousness. And I'm actually going to be talking about that in our next live stream. But the leaping consciousness associating from one to another, not doing a comparative mythological study and making a hierarchy between, but instead really looking at the multivalence, the multivalence of the both and the everything all together that is simultaneous, that is what's happening right now by all of us just being together and being on Earth. And all of it happens at once. And of course, there's many people that are also aware of past, present, and future in terms of quantum mechanics, physics, metaphysics, different thinkers and teachers talking about how past, present, and future are also simultaneous. So we can have our minds really widened and bent and everything deformed that seems small and objectified, and instead move into this wider place. So these are things that interested Daniel Deardorff, and he wrote about many of them in this short book, along with maybe 37 other stories and myths that are extracted or told in fuller versions, some very short, some much longer, within this great, dense book. So, without further ado, this reading, which is about authority and authenticity. On this day, on this auspicious day, where we make decisions and vote if we have a chance to voice our, if we have that privilege to voice our vote, that we do it if we haven't already. And we think about what is authority, what is true authority, and what is authenticity, real authenticity, and what is the relationship between the two. So Daniel taught that authority is from on high. It's the top down. It's the heavens. And authenticity is coming from the bottom up. It's earthy. It has the humbleness of the humus of the earth. It has the realness. It's sprouting upward. And in between, here we are. We're like in the mandorla, in the middle of the world tree, in between the great below and the great above, here on Middle Earth, as some say. Deardorff writes, it can be said that the authority of codified consensus or reason is top down, while the authenticity of the embodied and inactive imagination is bottom up. I'm going to say that again. It can be said that the authority of codified consensus or reason is top down, while the authenticity of the embodied and inactive is bottom up. Authority is cognitive reason. Authenticity is embodied expression. And what is called for here is both authentic and authoritative. The narrative cognitive leap downward, also called epistrophe. The movement sonic leaps upward, or from the alchemical term, renovatio. The narrative cognitive leaps downward, the movement sonic leaps upward. What we need is to locate a connective axis that can conduct these extremes, these extreme associations, in what Robert Bly has termed the leaping consciousness. In the modern world, the vertical pole of the universe has been laid nearly flat. So you can think in environmental terms, the world tree has been clear cut into the freeway horizontality of modern culture. In the modern world, the vertical pole of the universe has been laid nearly flat to form a flawlessly level freeway, an endless on-ramp of concrete and information. No longer do we bow our heads in reverence, but with chins held high, humanity marches forward, shoulder to equal shoulder, in an ever-rising progress to a lofty utopian future. Such idealism rapidly turns to fundamentalism. So I'm going to say it again. No longer do we bow our heads in reverence for the vertical, for the living world. But with chins held high, humanity marches forward, shoulder to equal shoulder, in an ever-rising progress to a lofty utopian future. That's the danger. It's getting far away from its roots. Such idealism rapidly turns to fundamentalism. And this is the mistake, or worse, the intentional substitution of the social center, replacing and displacing the sacred center. The delusion of this flat, spread out, readily accessible center, something like a shopping center, which Michael Meade also talks about, is explicated in an image from the Grimm's story Iron John. When the wild man is brought up from the depths in that story, captured and placed in a cage, which stands in a public courtyard of the castle, here the primal energy of the night world is locked up. That's the wild man, right? Is locked up, packaged, and openly exhibited, put on display in the day world, in that cage. However, its deep vitality is no longer available, for it has been demythologized, commodified, and thus alienated from its ontic context. As James Hillman explains, the energy is alienated based on the ontological disjunction, those are Hillman's words, between day world and night world. And to continue, quoting Hillman here, drawn to extremes, each world tries to deny the other. And a diagnosis of madness or of evil is placed by each on the other. Now we can look at all the otherness, the race relations, the ability, disability, the haves and have-nots, economically, educationally, living with safety, living with shelter, etc., and see this operating on all these levels of society. Again, I'll read Hillman's quote. Drawn to extremes, each world tries to deny the other, and a diagnosis of madness or of evil is placed by each on the other. Deardorff continues, in this way, the whole divine night, which is a phrase he loved from a poem by Friedrich Hölderlin, in this way, the whole divine night, the mysteries of the forest, the madness of the underworld, of dream, of darkness, and the lunacy of the moon are vanquished or rendered impotent. The human imperative to order, at its most inclusive, renders a fluid cosmology, as found in the shaman's threefold reality, a kaleidoscopic, swirling, overlapping mandalas, images, and myths that reveal a continual creation and the interrelatedness of each and every created thing. Should I say that again? The human imperative to order. So we have this imperative to order, to be organized. The human imperative to order, at its most inclusive, renders a fluid cosmology, as found in the shaman's threefold reality, a kaleidoscope of swirling, overlapping mandalas, images, and myths. Can you see the kaleidoscope? That reveal a continual creation. It's ever unfolding, and the interrelatedness of each and every created thing. This deep inclusivity, or underlying wholeness, is described by David Bohm, the physicist, as undivided wholeness in flowing movement, or in a word, the holo movement. And to quote Bohm, he says, the implicate order has its ground in the holo movement, which is vast, rich, and in a state of unending flux of enfoldment and unfoldment, with laws most of which are only vaguely known, and which may be ultimately unknowable in their totality. Thus, it cannot be grasped as something solid, tangible, and stable to the senses. I'm just going to read a little bit longer here to bring around this point. So we have authority coming from above, authenticity from the roots, the necessity to blend both of them in ourselves and keep verticality going and not just flatten everything and sever ourselves from the living world. And we have this phenomenon of the human mind will never be able to grasp in its entirety everything as if it is solid, tangible, and stable to the senses, because it is beyond anything that even one can grasp. The ever enfolding, unfolding background, Deardorff writes, is more enduring and permanently real than any of the transient laws, forms, or creatures that emerge momentarily out of the flux. As Bohm says, the reality of undivided wholeness in flowing movement is, quote, in some sense, prior to that of things that can be seen to form and dissolve in this flow. So there's a physicist telling us, reminding us that all the scientists know there was something before us, and there will be probably something beyond us and after us. When the perceived pattern of cosmos is fixed and closed, Deardorff writes, the purity of the ideal order is consequently vulnerable to degradation and contamination. The purity of the ideal order is consequently vulnerable to degradation and contamination when the perceived pattern of the cosmos, the perceived pattern, is fixed and closed. This is why we want to deform the imagination so our perception becomes open and porous, open to influences, ideas, new thoughts, new connections, and relationships with each other, lots of relationality. When the perceived pattern of the cosmos is fixed and closed, the purity of the ideal order is consequently vulnerable to degradation and contamination. The reality sanity model established by the ruler of men cannot admit the unaccounted for. It must refuse the unnamed. As Kenneth Patchen, the poet and novelist, wrote, quote, the saner we are, the more danger of madness there is. I'm going to close there. Thank you for listening, and I would love to hear any questions, thoughts, comments on what you just heard. Feel free to say anything you like in the chat. Hello, Janine. Good to meet you. I know there was somebody trying to do a dating site thing that they put in the chat. We don't need to pay attention to that. And Will, thank you for coming. The saner we are, the more danger of madness there is. That's a quote from Kenneth Patchen. Let's make sure to put that attribution in the chat. So I'm going to be doing this 2 more times at 3 o'clock and at 5 o'clock Pacific time today. And we are also having the first book launch event, a longer conversation, which will include some archival video and audio of Daniel calling fire, telling stories, singing about the carrying of story and the carrying of fire. And that will be this November 12th, this Saturday night at 7 p.m. Pacific. And it's with our dear friend Juanita Roberson, who is the author of The Inner-Ground Railroad. And the two of us are going to be riffing on this together, along with your questions and answers and input, and Daniel's voice and image. And we hope that you'll be able to join us. And I believe that Audrey's going to put in the chat the place where you can get tickets. They're all by donation. No one will be turned away for lack of funds. And we do have a treasure trove of other archival material, and your donations in any amount are welcome for that event and also at large for the Mythsinger Legacy Project. You can find more information on mythsingerlegacy.org. And I'll just close by saying, in those last days, in the very last full day of Daniel's life on Earth, at a certain point, he had been conducting us to sing around him, around the bed. And he said to us and to the people who were caring for him and the care team, he said, keep the song going. And his daughter said, yeah, Dad, what song is that? He said, the song I'm in. So he's still in the song. He's the myth singer. And it is up to us to keep carrying the song forward. Keep the song going. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you again soon. I'll just wait a minute in case there's any questions. Yeah, thank you. That tree, authenticity and authority, has always helped me in any kind of leadership and just being present with people in relationship. And I learned that from Daniel Deardorff.